So who are Universal Wealth LLP? Some of you may know, as there's been a bit of coverage of them in the media, certainly in the last kind of couple of years, but they are or were a group of companies who provided financial advice to individuals. They were an unregulated company. As you can see from the slides, the directors of the two directors of the company were Stephen and Melanie Long. These two individuals made a lot of money from a lot of people. They generally offered products like asset preservation trusts mainly, and those are the things that we found most of the issues with. But they also offered will drafting services and LPAs. They did a campaign called Keep It in the Family, which targeted those individuals approaching retirement age, there or about retirement age, and sold them the idea that the services they could provide would have kind of far-reaching tax benefits to them, and they would provide residential care planning and preserve generational family wealth. So these individuals, obviously concerned with those issues, would sign up to this scheme. They'd create wills with the company. They would transfer their homes into trust on the understanding that that was tax efficient for them, and also on the understanding that in order that in doing so they would protect themselves from losing their homes to pay for their care home fees, which we all know are extortionately expensive. So to protect that asset, that was the main goal for most, and they would pay for this privilege. So they would pay a fee for the work undertaken, and then they would also pay an annual subscription, an annual fee for the ongoing provision of the services from Universal Wealth. So Universal Wealth managed really high numbers of asset preservation trusts, but in January 2018 the clients were informed that the Universal trustees were unable to act as trustees any longer, and in May 2018 the company ceased trading and all their accounts were frozen and the company went into liquidation. Consequently, the investments that were made by the individuals were completely untraceable, and there's still millions of pounds that we cannot locate. And there is an ongoing operation with Suffolk Police called Operation Ardent. So that's ongoing at present. Stephen Long actually served time in prison because he for contempt of court, because he refused to disclose the evidence of where those funds were to the court. Not all individuals who have these APTs in place know that there's any problems with them. And due to the coverage of the media, people have found that actually they've signed up to these APTs and they are problematic and are now looking to get them resolved. So that's where we come in, and we can absolutely do that. It's much easier for us to be involved when the individuals are alive. We have dealt with matters where people have died, and that makes it a lot more complicated. But if we can get the people who have signed up to these schemes, who are still alive, to execute the documents, then that is much easier. So, what are the issues for the clients of Universal Wealth? Okay, well, there's lots of cash invested, and it was completely irrecoverable and untraceable, and that money is wasted. People paid for the privilege, and now people have to pay for the privilege of resolving those issues. So what started out to be a money-saving exercise in terms of tax and estate planning has now cost individuals a lot of money. The APTs themselves, asset preservation trusts, just aren't fit for purpose. essentially a gift with reservation of benefit, which makes it defective in terms of care home planning. There's many people out there who might be watching this video who'll know much more about financial estate planning than we do. Obviously, we deal with the contentious element of it, but it's potentially a problem for inheritance tax, and then there's the potential issues which we'll come on to later for CGT tax, which is payable. So different mechanisms were deployed to place the property into trust, and we've seen variations of the trust, but they were all affected by a deed. Some were placed into trust by using a legal charge, and this has different consequences, and this is what's really problematic in terms of CGT, which I'll come on to later. So the trusts themselves, they are irrevocable, so you can't bring them to an end. However, within the trust that we have seen, the Universal Wealth Asset Preservation Trust, we have found that they do provide for preserve the power, of the settler to replace the trustees during their lifetime. So if the settlers are still alive, which is the point I was making earlier about how it's easier to do this when the individuals are still alive, they can enter into deeds of retirement and reappointment to retire the Universal Wealth trustees and appoint new trustees in their place. However, if the settler is deceased, you need the consent of the trustees, and given that Universal Wealth is now in liquidation, that's quite difficult sometimes to obtain. The properties that were placed into trust, their titles were all amended, setting out that the Universal Trustees are the beneficial owners, so they appear as on the proprietorship register, on the official copies of title of the properties, and that's one of the things that needs to be rectified, because on paper those individuals can deal with the property without reference to the people who live there. We haven't had any cases where that has actually happened, but for a lot of people who have understood the kind of control element over their property, which is their main asset, when we've explained that to them, that's quite a terrifying prospect. And we've had situations where people have been looking to move and they can't then do so because they can't find the people who they need to provide them with the necessary consent. So in order to rectify the position with the Land Registry, we would need to draft an application which needs the consent of the trustees, and again it's very difficult to obtain. There's also lots of missing documentation. We often need originals to be able to do the job that we need to do, but there is a lot of documentation that's missing. Suffolk Police are involved, or are in charge of Operation Ardent. We have contacts with Suffolk Police Fraud Team who are managing it, and they have seized all of the files that were found at Universal Wealth's premises, so we can contact them and ask them to look through their documents to see if we can find the originals, but in our experience there's still a lot missing. And then finally, the use of legal charge when placing the properties into trust. This has adverse tax consequences in terms of CGT, which was not anticipated by the individuals and can be a substantial amount of money. Given that the most of these trusts were entered into to minimise tax and maximise, the asset preservation for the future generations, it's clear that then when you find that there's an adverse CGT, payable, it's not fit for purpose at all, and the individuals involved weren't advised of those potential consequences. We've also had instances where property's been placed into trust that is below the inheritance tax threshold, so it's not even appropriate for inheritance tax planning. Right, so what are the adverse consequences of the CGT liability? This has been the main really big issue when it comes to these universal wealth matters. So the use of legal charge, the legal charge is used to place the property into trust. It's not always the case. In some circumstances, and we've had quite a few where a legal charge isn't used, and that is much easier to resolve, but it's still problematic, but it can be done, and we have experience of dealing with these types of matters. We'd need to review the wording of the legal charge carefully if there was a legal charge in place, but essentially the legal charge creates a debt of a share in the property to be paid into the trust at a later date. When we've reviewed the wording of the legal charges, we found that the drafting isn't compliant with the Taxation of Chargeable Gains Act 1992. They generally state that it's that the part of the property is either a half share in the property is being placed into trust, but that is not in excess of the value of the nil band rate. So there's no definitive amount of debt. There's no certainty regarding when it's to be repaid. And because of that wording, it threw out the private residence relief that's usually applicable to dwellings, and therefore CGT is payable on the whole value of the property. So, as I said before, that can be a lot of money, and the clients weren't advised on that, or were advised generally that this would be tax efficient when clearly it's not. We have run a couple of these matters to court, and both the courts and HMRC agree with our interpretation of this and agree that CGT is payable. So you can see the potential substantial consequences to individuals if this isn't resolved. But we've successfully had 2 charges set aside, which is really good. So I'll just come on to the example on the next page. This is a matter that my colleague dealt with, Kate Saunders. So just a brief overview of this matter. There were mirrored APTs created in September 2013. The beneficiaries were the settlor, the spouse, and children, and that's common. That's quite a standard APT that we've had with Universal Trust. Trustees were Universal Trust LLP. There was a legal charge in place which placed the shares in the main residence into trust. Universal Wealth were informed the individuals that no CGT would be payable, and it would be tax efficient to enter into this trust and to do it in this way, but gave limited advice otherwise. For the reasons I've set out previously, the charge was defective, and the CGT liability for these individuals was in the region of £120,000. The clients were able to alter the trustees of the APTs, as I've set out before. We can do that, but they weren't able to remove the charge. So we applied to court, we made a mistake application, and the court granted relief to set aside the charge. So what that resulted in was obviously averting that huge capital gains tax, but also because we had because we'd removed the trustees, we could then and had the charge set aside, we could also remove the property from the trust. The trust remains in place, but it's not operative as there's no assets contained within the trust. So recommendations for Universal Wealth clients. Well, I mean, a lot of these individuals have still got standing order payments for management fees going out, so we would advise that to be cancelled. And then we would offer a review of the APTs for advice, and we can provide advice on whether or not a court application is necessary, or whether we can go about it without needing to apply to court. We need to locate the original documents, so we can help with that, or we can we can give contact information for Suffolk Police so the individuals can try and locate it themselves. We are conscious of the costs for individuals, but obviously it's a worthwhile exercise getting this resolved. So then consider the appointment and replacement of trustees. So in order to do this, we'd need to draft deeds of retirement to retire the old trustees and reappoint the new trustees, then move the property out of trust. The original trust remains in place, but there are no assets contained within that trust. We'd also then deal with the land registry to try to get the trustees removed from the copies of from the proprietorship register, and get the individuals who are in the property, who own the property legally, restored back onto the official copies of title. If we need to deal with the charge, if there is a legal charge, then obviously we need the court's approval, so we'd have to make that application. We'd have to make the court application regardless, so you can't alter legal charge even if we had the consent of the trustees. We can do all the other processes if we can get the individual's consent. We have contact with a firm who had power of attorney for Mr. and Mrs. Long, and up until recently we were getting their authorisation to remove the trustees from the land registry documents and to deal with the deeds of retirement, etc. But up until recently, the PAs have now expired, but we are informed that they're getting new ones signed, so we're awaiting those, and then once they come in we can deal directly with that firm, which makes things much easier. So I think I've covered it off a little bit, but we have the campaign where our aim really is to educate individuals on the issues with universal wealth. And it's not just universal wealth, there are some other companies who have similar setups and offered similar schemes, and there are individuals who are now looking at the setup, or they're doing some kind of final planning for the inevitable, and their children are kind of involved, and then they look at them and think, hang on a minute, this doesn't look right to me, and then they might get in contact with us. We've had a few people like that. So we really want to educate everybody on the risks of those type of arrangements, and to get them reviewed to make sure that they are actually fit for purpose. And there are circumstances where it's sufficient to plan. Estate planning is a must for a lot of people, but to do it in a way where you are using people who, reputable firms who are regulated, and you've got some protection if things go wrong. So our main aim is to educate. We will offer a free review of the trusts for our universal wealth clients. So we would have a look at the trust documents, the wills, the property registers of title, and then we can provide some initial advice about what we think needs to happen, and obviously a discussion about whether or not a court application is necessary, and discussion about costs to undertake that work. But the initial review, the initial guide in the first direction is free of charge, and we will do that for individuals free of charge, no problem. We'll then liaise, to try to locate the original documents. As I said before, we've got contacts at Suffolk Police, so we can either signpost individuals there, or we can obtain that information for them. In certain circumstances, so often each individual case we can apply kind of broad brush approaches to all of them, but they do have slight nuances, and we have barristers in place who are specialists who can advise on the kind of complexities. So we've got a team of people who are armed to deal with this if necessary. These matters, we've rolled out this campaign for months and months now, and we are still finding that a lot of people are coming to us with these issues, so it's still a problem. And I've talked about the cases that we had at court where we've managed to set aside those charges, which is a brilliant result. But we have had other matters where we haven't needed to go to court, and we haven't had legal charges in place. We haven't needed to go to court. We've had people who've come to us who've had other solicitors acting for them and who haven't been able to resolve the issues, and then they've come to us, and because we've got this experience of dealing with them before, we've been able to resolve them. So we have been dealing with them more and more. We've got lots of experience, and we've got a team of people who can assist if necessary. If you have any questions about anything I've discussed today, please feel free to drop me an email. As I've said to you, our campaign is there to educate and also to provide a resource to point people in the right direction of where they need to go. So please feel free to contact me, and I can answer any questions that you may have about a potential claim. Thank you very much.